Hello and good morning to the two of you that are here. I thought I'd go ahead and get on a little bit early. Oh, hang on a second. Do, do, do. Well, hello there again. Not sure what all happened there. Lost my connection totally. Had to get all the way out and all the way back in. But now there's 4 of you instead of 2, so that's great. I'm Susan. We're in my studio, Stitched by Susan. I've got my little cup of coffee. Let's chat for a minute while we wait for a few more to get on. Yeah, let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm in Spokane, Washington. As you can see out my patio window, it's a rainy, rainy day. You'll probably hear the traffic splashing by as we're on. But a beautiful day for quilting, and for me today, a beautiful day for doing office work, because those things have to be done too. So, for starters, let me know in the comments for sure if you can hear and see me. I would appreciate that, and only if you're watching this live. On the replay, it won't make a difference. So let me get a sip while a few more tune in, and we'll get going. Let's see if we have any comments. Donna can see and hear me. That's great. Okay. I'm so glad, Donna, that you chimed in. Thank you so much. And Cassandra, great. It's sometimes very hard to tell at this end of the stream. So hello from Finland. Awesome. Colfax, gloomy here too. Can hear and see. Great, great, great. And if you're watching this as a replay, you don't have to chime in on that because I won't be able to do anything about it. But I'm Susan Smith. You're in my studio, Stitched by Susan. And I did not get on live yesterday. You may or may not have noticed. I hope you didn't notice. I hope you were so busy celebrating Easter with your family that you didn't. I had a pretty full day. I did cinnamon buns in the morning at our church for kind of a brunch and welcome for all our members. And then we went to some friends for a supper in, well, late lunch, I guess, in the afternoon, and stayed into the evening. And I thought, you know, I'm just going to soak up family, and I hope all of you did that too and just had a wonderful, refreshing Easter Sunday. So lots of good mornings coming in. Orcutt, California, Kentucky, Colorado, Australia. Fantastic. 12:15 a.m. Mary, you are so dedicated. You're on here often in the mornings, in the wee hours. Okay, let's get started. We were talking on Saturday about how to create a square result quilting on the long arm without needing to center. So today I'm going to continue that on a little bit. We talked about the backing in particular on Saturday. So if you haven't seen that one, go back and watch part 1 of 2. This is part 2 of 2, because today we're going to talk a little bit more about the top of the quilt, the actual pretty part. And it just so happened that I have got the perfect client quilt here to illustrate my points today. So I've already got the backing loaded up on the long arm. So I loaded it at the front on a straight edge. I rolled it all into place. What's unique, one of the unique features about this quilt, is the backing is all pieced. Can you see that? There's multiple seams and quite a lot of piecing going on. I chose to load it crossways, so the length of the quilt is running across my machine for a couple of reasons. One is you can see at the top there's one long border. There's the same thing at the other end. So I'm saying top now because that's how I've got it loaded on the long arm, but that's actually on each side of the resulting quilt, right? When it comes off the long arm and we turn it. So there's going to be a long, it's not exactly white, but let's call it white because it's a white textural fabric on each side. So that enabled me to have those long seams running crossways on my rails, which is always my first preference. There are so many seams on this quilt. I could have gone either way, but I chose to go that direction. It is also fewer passes as I'm advancing the quilt, so that helps me get it done a little more quickly. And then one last thing. Because there is that solid border on both sides of the quilt, so now loaded top and bottom of the long arm, I wanted to know where my quilt was being placed between those borders. So I had a couple of options. I could have loaded my backing the other way and then I could see where I was placing my quilt. But what I chose to do so that I could have my seams running crosswise is I laid it all out on my floor first, and I opened up the top as well and laid it on and figured out where that placement would be. And now I have put, I think you can see it right there, I've put a pin where I want the edge of my quilt to come. So when I load my batting and load my quilt top, I've actually got a couple of pins, I'm going to line my quilt up with those pins. So even though I can't see the big border at the other end, I know that I've got my quilt placed correctly to center. So I ended up talking more about the backing, didn't I? But what we really want to talk about is the front. This is the front of her quilt, and this is just part of it. What's the first thing you notice? It is all on the bias. And even there are more solid areas in it, but they too are large, chunky blocks, and everything is on point. All the edges are on the bias. So this is a great example of how, as a quilter, even when we receive a nice square flat quilt top, we still have to take steps to achieve a finished quilt, because I could still mess this up, believe me. So one of the things that this quilter did, which was lovely, I'll try and show you, is did a row of stay stitching. Can you see that? All the way around, and it's just a little more than an 1/8 inch in from the edge of the quilt, and she did it around the entire perimeter. We quilters like to call that taking a victory lap when you're finished piecing that quilt. But it does stabilize all those bias edges and certainly helps me to keep them straight. But I also measured my quilt top very carefully. So if you're not working with one on the bias, but perhaps working with one that's got a bit of wonkiness and you can visibly see one end is narrower or the middle is narrower, it's an hourglass shape, I recommend taking the time to take some good measurements of that quilt. I know when we talk about adding borders, we often say take, top, middle, and bottom measurements, average, add the border. I think a little bit differently when I'm loading it on the long arm. I tend to go much nearer to the narrowest measurement that the quilt is, because I can't really stretch out those narrow areas. When I release it off the long arm, they're just going to pull back in. So what is the narrowest area? That's really the width or the length that I want to achieve in the quilt. And this is not, it's not about perfection. I did a YouTube episode a while back. You might want to watch it. It's called the 2-inch minimizer, and you ladies will get the joke. It was a small lap quilt, and it had 2 inches of difference in, I don't know, maybe a 45-inch quilt. It wasn't very big. And I took fairly drastic measures to try and pull in that fullness to the narrowest spaces. It is not always possible to get it all to that narrowest measurement, but that would be your goal. So instead of trying to stretch that out, if there is indeed 2 inches of difference, or maybe there's only 1 or 3/4 or half, that's very doable. And so then I pull in the areas that are a little bit larger and I ease them in so that they match the part that is the narrowest. And that's going to achieve a quilt with steady, consistent width. That's the word I'm looking for. So in the case of mine that I'm working on today, this is all bias. So it's got a lot of give in it. So certainly I can mess with it if I need to. It is quite nice and square and flat. So there's not there's no fixing that I need to do. I just need to be aware, and with every pass of my quilt, I need to be assessing and possibly making adjustments to keep it flat and square, because I could so easily stretch that really out of whack. So again, I took measurements before I came to the long arm to load it, and I've got you can see it, my long armer's measuring tape that's stuck right up there along the top of the rail. I'm going to use that. I'm going to know what the left and the right measurements are of my quilt, and every time I advance, I will check that my quilt is that width, that I'm not running all together to the left or one side squeezing in. I'm going to double check those measurements every single time I advance until I get to the bottom. It's a little harder to see the front rail and keep it straight because there are no seams that run from side to side on this quilt anywhere. So I'm going to have to use kind of my intuition, as they always say on the British Baking Show, use your intuition, and also kind of use my knowledge of fabric. So I'm going to step back. My top will be floating, as it often is, right? Hanging down this front rail. I can step back a bit and look at it, and I can see if the fabric is hanging toward one side or pulling or has a frown in it. You'll start to see that in not creases, but fold lines or pull lines on the fabric. So every time I advance, I'm going to be stepping back and watching for that and being aware of that and smoothing it out more firmly if I need to keep that smooth and flat hanging this floating front. And of course, I will use my magnetic bars on the front as well. Once I've got it in place, I will put those bars in place before I do my quilting so that I know it's staying square and flat. So all that together should give me a nice flat result. So let's see what you guys are saying. I've been doing all the talking here. Let's back up. Okay, can see in here. Some of these I've already read. Okay, Frida, what needle do you use when quilting with Cuddle or Minky? I haven't used Cuddle specifically, which is a longer fiber. I've used Minky lots of times and I just use my same universal needle. My machine seems happy with that, so that's what I've done. I think I've heard quilters say you might try a ballpoint, but I'm not an expert because I really haven't tried other needles. Cindy, sun is coming out here in western Iowa. Oh, and she's asking someone else if they're in Colfax, Iowa. There's a Colfax, Washington too, so I'm not 100% sure on that. Okay, if you have any questions about this, go ahead and shoot them at me. I don't know if I know the answers or not, but I'm happy to discuss them. But this is kind of a, I don't know, it's a hobby of mine, is to take whatever I'm given as a quilt and really make that effort to make a square and flat result. I do a fair bit of quilting for, either for comfort quilts, and I don't know who pieced them, but a number of my clients too are quite elderly ladies, some of them very much so. You know, maybe eyesight isn't what it once was and things like that. So it's really my pleasure and my challenge to take that and say, okay, how can I make this look as good as possible? How can I quilt down the bulky seams to make them flat? How can I square it up and make a really, really pretty result? So I've put a lot of time and thought into this idea of how to get a square quilt, you know, without spending a day and an age on it. So you guys are not very talkative this morning. It must be Monday. Let's see what else. Cindy is in Iowa. I missed that one, sorry. No quilting today, yard work instead, but love your daily advice. Great. Anne-Marie in North Carolina. Liz in New Mexico. Belinda, I think I saw yours before. Peggy in Temecula, California. Great. You're here from all over the world. That's so awesome. Well, I'm going to take another sip of coffee while you have a chance to put in a few more questions. And let me take a second too to invite you to an upcoming workshop. It is going to be next Saturday, the 15th of April, which is this coming Saturday, I guess is a better way to word it. And I call it 5 Myths that Tie Freehand Quilters in Knots and How to Break Free of Them. It's the most common objections I hear from wannabe freehand quilters, you know, for reasons that they only use a paper pantograph or they've never done it because they're just sure they couldn't for this reason or that or the other. So I'm going to talk about some of those reasons and bust those myths. I'm going to come armed with a ton of photographs and examples to talk through my points and show you how I, who also do not consider myself an artist, became a freehand quilter. So 5 Myths that Tie Freehand Quilters in Knots and How to Break Free of Them. That is happening on Saturday. I've put the registration link in the notes right below this episode so that you can register there if you're interested in that. And yes, replays will be available, but you do need to register in order to get the emails and the reminders and the workbook and then the link for that replay afterwards. So that should grab all the questions. Okay, YouTube just fired a whole raft of comments at me, so let me read back through them because clearly I missed a bunch before. Needle, we saw that one. What is your preferred way to load a Minky backing? I always prefer to do it with the selvage at the top and the bottom because I have a little more control over how much I stretch it. I think I have a YouTube episode about that too, working with Minky backing. It's very possible. It just requires a little bit more attention to, you know, the stretchability of the fabric and managing that stretch. It's very doable and makes a wonderful quilt. Such a hard time getting the comments to show again. Hang on a sec here. There we go. Okay, morning from Ontario, Canada. Houston, Texas. Where did you get your red snappers? I ordered them right from the people who make them, quiltsonthecorner.com. They're out of Utah. Cindy, hopes the sun comes out. Cassandra, implementing a few of your tricks, I've already been able to get flatter and more square quilts. Wonderful. It is cumulative, Cassandra. All these things help a little bit. But you know, if you have 4 things that add 5%, you're a long way toward a square quilt. Sean is in her sewing room in Oklahoma. Rianne, thank you for all your great trips. Central Wyoming. Melissa, I just got the Bernina. They told me to start the red snappers behind the bar before the uptake bar. Does that make sense? It does, Melissa, and I have messed around with that, and at this point, I've got my bar raised enough that I can run the snappers under them, but I have to put in as a disclaimer, that is not Bernina's recommended way. They do not recommend that size of a gap. So far, my machine is okay with it. I'm exploring other ideas because I don't think it's ideal. So you might want to try their way. It just means you need a little more extra backing at that top edge, a little extra clearance up there. I have such a time getting the comments to show. I'm sorry. Janice, getting my first square quilt because I floated over the roller bar instead of under the roller. Yeah, good. I'm glad it's working for you. It is so worth exploring different ways to load to see how you can get the best result. I see that my face is super in shadow today. Sorry about that. Mary, thanks for all the tips. I've learned so much. I'm in Arkansas. Peggy, I've been loading my Minky with the selvage on the side lately. It seems not to stretch as much. Okay, great, good to know. So that might be something that you want to try. Whoever was asking about the Minky. Yeah, it might be another thing where quilters have differing opinions, and it also may be that different brands respond a bit differently, different brands of Minky like. So there's so many variables. It's impossible to give a definitive answer, but I can tell you why I did something a certain way, and you might tell me why you did something a certain way. And so we have our reasons, and if they work for you, that's great. Okay, folks, I gotta get to quilting. I'm gonna try and do this whole quilt today. So whatever you're doing today, I hope that you enjoy it thoroughly. Thank you for joining me, and I'll be back tomorrow. And I think tomorrow's topic is going to be tension. So, that's a real touchy topic, and there's lots of information on it. So I'll just be skimming the surface, but hopefully I'll have a few great tips for you that would be helpful. So I will see you tomorrow.